Tulsa.
Welcome back to Black Girl Watching, where we break down your favorite films and TV shows. I'm Brooke Obie, film critic, writer, editor, and screenwriter.
And I'm Britni Danielle, writer, editor, cultural critic, and we both love watching and reading Black art. And we're super excited today to talk about episode 4 of Lovecraft Country, A History of Violence. And when I tell you super excited, the 80s kid in me jumped all the way out because, yes, excitement, action, and adventure, but with Black folks.
Yes. So if you want to join in on the conversation with us, you can follow us on social media, use the hashtag BlackGirlWatching, ask us questions. You can also tweet us at BLKGRLWatching to share your thoughts, any theories you might have as well. And you can also check out our website, blackgirlwatching.com, and send us comments and email us through there as well. And we have a very, very, very special guest joining us today. So you definitely want to stay tuned through the episode so that you can hear what director Victoria Mahoney has to say. She is the director of episode 4 and also a history maker herself. She is the first woman, and Black woman especially, to be a director in the Star Wars franchise. She was the second unit director handpicked by J.J. Abrams for Rise of the Skywalker that just came out last December. So you definitely want to stick around to hear her perspective on how she shot this episode and some things you might have missed and what scene almost did not make it into the episode. So definitely stay tuned for that.
Yep. It's time for the recap. Let's get into it.
Before we get into the recap, make sure you know that we are talking about Lovecraft Country episode 4, A History of Violence. There are spoilers all throughout this episode.
Yes. So if you have not seen the episode yet, pause the podcast, watch the episode, and then come back to hang out with us as we get all the way into it.
So let's do it. A History of Violence. Montrose is going through it in the beginning of this episode. That opening scene, we see him struggling with violence, as the title of the episode denotes. So he is remembering and kind of suffering from a bit of PTSD, it seems like, what happened to him and George during the Tulsa race massacre in 1921. He's remembering his father abusing him. He's remembering arguments that he had with Tick. And he's remembering the murder of his brother George that just happened. And he is in a drunken stupor as well. Montrose is using this alcohol to try to deal with all of this violence in his mind that he is remembering as if it's happening right in front of him. And so he, in his drunken stupor, he reads the Order of the Dawn bylaws that George gave to him in episode 2 to protect Tick. But instead of using the Order of Dawn bylaws and giving it to Tick like George wanted, he burns the bylaws in the trash can by pouring alcohol over it and setting it on fire. And then he says it smells like Tulsa to just let us know what we're dealing with. He is connecting all of the violence in his life up into the present moment. And so that was a really, really powerful opening scene.
It was. And at the end of it, I'm just kind of like, really, Montrose? Really? I get that he feels like he's doing the right thing by maybe burning this book and discouraging or trying to discourage Tick from wanting to know more and do more. But like, this is also something that, you know, I hate to throw out the cliche, knowledge is power, but we see it later in the episode that his knowledge of the book that he read, you know, and was probably reading multiple times, was one of the things that saved their lives. So on one hand, you know, he's trying to get rid of it maybe out of rage because, you know, this book is connected to the people that killed his brother. It's connected to him. It's connected to Montrose being used as a pawn to bring Tick down there in the first place. It's connected to a lot of horrific things that have happened to them over this past month or so. And so, you know, he's angry and he's burning this book, but he's also burning something that is immensely powerful and could be used to help them. And so I was like, I was mad. I was mad at him for doing it.
Right. I understand. He does a lot of things that are maddening in this episode, but I think understanding that history of violence, once again, helps us to at least understand a little bit about what Montrose is going through and why he makes the really upsetting decisions that he makes. But before we get to more about what Montrose is doing and what he's up to, we see that Black people's magic does work on white supremacy once again. So we have Christina, who is fresh off of being accosted by Atticus in the last episode, where he's trying to shoot her in the head, and her invulnerability spell that her father, I guess, put on their entire bloodline prevents her from being killed. And so she's done with Atticus. She goes straight to Letty's house to try and get Hiram's orrery, which is this gold solar system
contraption
tool thing. Yes. And we find out later in the episode that Christina believes that this orrery can help not only get to the pages that Hiram stole from Titus Braithwaite back in the day, she also believes that this can open his time travel machine. So that's a really interesting point that we'll have to keep in mind. But she can't get into Letty's house because there is an X on the doorpost still from when the Yoruba priestess slaughtered the goat on the porch and put an X on the doorpost of the house. So if anybody has any doubt that Christina is not a horrible white supremacist she-devil, that should let you know right there, when she can't get into that house, the house is protected from her, that she is just as dangerous as she's been presenting, and she is not anybody's friend. But she does give Letty some more information about Hiram's orrery that Letty then uses to figure out, for one, that Christina is the one who gave her the money to buy the house. It was not an inheritance from her mother. So Christina has been playing all of them all along. She goes to confront Tick with this information at the library, and he also confirms that she had to have been the one behind what happened at the lodge in episode 2, where Tick disintegrated Christina's father,
everybody.
Samuel Braithwaite, yes, as well as every member of that lodge, the founding chapter of the Order of the Dawn. So we see that Christina, again, is very manipulative, very calculating, and very powerful. They both figure that Montrose has more information about how they can go and find the pages that Christina is looking for before Christina finds them, because Tick believes he can cast some spells of his own to protect Black people, which sounds really great. But Montrose is not buying it.
Not only is he not buying it, he's drinking again. So he's at once trying to discourage Tick and Letty from embarking on this quest by, kind of talking, not even kind of, but straight up talking down to him, boy. Like he throws that word in there because Tick is a grown man and boy is loaded on multiple levels, but boy, because one, Montrose is his dad, so he's like, you're still a boy, you're not a man, basically. So that's a jab. And boy, in the way of like, you're not gonna be able to defeat these white people, boy. And that is a slur that was used toward Black men to kind of try to keep them in an inferior state. So Montrose is trying everything he can do to discourage Tick and Letty from trying to figure these things out. But at the same time, he lets it slip that there are 34 lodges and he has more information, and they can sense that he has more information, but he's not willing to share it until Letty collects him. She puts him right in his place. It's like, yo, so he's just like you. You didn't stop trying to find out this information, so much so that you ended up imprisoned in, you know, this random village by these white folks that you dug your way out of, and we were there to pick you up. Like, you know that he is also like you, and he's also like George, where he's on a quest for information. He's not going to stop until he gets that information. And she basically called Montrose out, being like, so you just going to let him go out there and bang his head against the wall, even though you already have some of this info? And then he reluctantly decides to join them on this quest.
Right. So the information that Montrose has is that Titus Braithwaite was one of the founders of this museum in Boston, and he has a wing in this museum, and they believe that Titus's vault or some more information about Titus's vault, where he might have kept the rest of the pages of the Book of Names that they need to learn to cast the spells, might be in this museum in Boston. But of course, none of them have cars. The only person who had a car was George, the old faithful Woody. So now Montrose has to go to Hippolyta to ask to borrow the car. But of course, instead of just letting them borrow the car, after we've seen what happened the last time, they took out Woody and her husband wound up dead mysteriously in a way that she still does not accept. She's not going to just let them borrow the car. She's going to come with them to the horror of Tick and Letty and Montrose as well. But I mean, they really don't have a choice. They have to use this car to get to Boston. And Hippolyta not only comes along, she also brings her daughter, Diana. They're going to go to this museum that's about science and astronomy. And we already know that Hippolyta and Diana are obsessed with science and astronomy. So this is going to be a little bit of an adventure for them as well. Seymour stops them just before they leave. He wants to hop in as well. And Hippolyta sees this as an opportunity to jab at Montrose, who she believes is lying to her about her husband's death. How would you describe this, Britni, her behavior?
She's being passive aggressive. Like, she knows that Montrose is lying. Montrose even looks like he's lying when he's trying to say it. He feels guilty about it. She was annoyed at Tick in her house because she knew he lied about it too. And so, you know, the guilt was eating Tick up. So that alters his behavior. Montrose is altered, and she, you know, she's been knowing this man for a long time. So instead of slapping him, which is a valid response, or disowning him, also valid, or like just kicking him out of her life and kicking Tick and Montrose out of her life until they start telling her the truth, she is passive aggressive. When they see Seymour, aka out in front of the house, and he's trying to get a ride to Philadelphia, she's like, sure, Woody can fit the whole South Side. And she knows it's going to work everybody's nerves, because Tick and Tree don't even get along. We've seen them have little beefs, tiny beefs in these past couple of episodes. And
it's so funny though, because it seems like the beef is one-sided. Like, Seymour's always like, oh, hey, it's Tick. Oh, you're great. I guess maybe he bullied Tick when he was little or something, because Tick is holding on to he does not like this man, and Seymour is not catching the hint at all.
Yeah, no, I think I think we learned in the first episode that, you know, Tick was this little nerdy kid with big glasses, and Tree was a bigger kid and he was a bully. But now that, you know, Tick went to the army, he grew up, he started lifting weights apparently, because he just got shoulders on shoulders. His shoulders got shoulders, right? And so he still has grievances from when he was younger about how people treated him, whether it was his father, who was just straight up abusive, or neighborhood bullies. So yeah, in short, they do not get along, but Tree doesn't seem to realize they don't get along.
Until they wind up at this museum in Boston, where Titus Braithwaite was a huge donor and has his own wing. And that's when they start to discover a little bit about where Titus's vault might be, and that it might actually be located in the museum itself. But in the process of that, Letty has told Tree that she knows that he lied to Tick about them having sex back in high school. Because as we saw in the last episode, Letty had never had sex before she and Tick had sex on the bathroom counter. And so Tree is upset. And so he confronts Atticus about telling Letty that he was lying on her, basically. And so to kind of get back at him, Tree let him know that Montrose has been getting very close to Sammy, who is the bar owner that we saw in episode 1, who was getting head out in the alleyway by another man. So we know that Sammy has sex with men. And Tree is essentially saying, hey, your father is probably gay. Mm-hmm. And so that comes to as a big shock to Tick. And Tick sees, he looks over at Montrose, and Montrose is actually engaged in this really deep conversation with this black male security guard at the museum. This man is a connection that Montrose found at the bar where Sammy works. So he's starting to be very skeptical, but it does kind of put into light a little bit about what was happening in the beginning of the episode when Montrose was remembering his father beating him. And perhaps his father was beating Montrose because he was expressing indications of what his sexuality was.
Yeah, because when Tree brings it up, Atticus is he really is still dealing with Tree like Tree is the bully from his childhood, because when he brings it up, like, oh, sorry, you had to see that, but I thought you should know, or I thought you would want to know. And Tick's first response is, I ain't no sissy. He's not asking him like, well, why do you think I would need to see that? That has nothing to do with me. His first response is, I ain't no sissy. And then Tree is like, yeah, but your dad and him have been getting close. So I think, everybody in this show still has things that they're working out from their past, and they're still experiencing from their past, which kind of goes back to the first scene in the episode when Montrose is going through the struggle because he's having PTSD from all of these things that have happened to him. But literally each of our characters have that. So Letty has this troubled relationship with her brother and her sister because of how her mother treated her. And so that caused her to react differently. Tick has troubled relationship with his dad because of the abuse and how his dad was like very, very hard on him. Montrose, we know what his struggles are so far, and they could be even deeper than what we've seen so far. So this show is about generational trauma, but it's also about interpersonal relationship trauma and how we treat each other, especially parents and children.
Exactly.
So the layers on layers on layers.
As always. So once Tick figures out that the tomb is right in the middle of this museum, the genre kind of switches a little bit. And so we get this whole Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom kind of adventure right after they figure out where the vault is. Mm-hmm.
It's Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. It's more along that it's more along that line. But yeah, that's one of the things. As soon as we got underneath this museum, I was like, oh my God, shout out to Indy and them. Like, this is Indiana Jones, and it's like a black Indiana Jones that is done really well, and it doesn't have the same problematic and stereotypical weight that the Indiana Jones series has. And I know you said you've never seen it, which I think is like, I don't know how you escaped
Indiana Jones.
I don't know how you escaped
Goonies
childhood in the 80s and 90s without seeing one of those movies, but
I was born when those movies when they came out. Indiana Jones came out in 1984. I was born in 1985.
But I saw them in like, there was like a 10-year stretch where Indy was like a thing. So it wasn't like just I know the images. Yeah.
I picked up very quickly. So I mean, and there was like, the outfits and everything that they were wearing as well. Like, I picked up very quickly that this was Indiana Jones imagery. But yeah, no, I didn't. I've never seen either of those or the Goonies, which also that came out in 85. So
yeah, and this gave me big Goonie vibes too because of the whole scene, and we'll talk about it later once they get, through the booby traps, which is something that is very prominent in both Indiana Jones and the Goonies have prominent booby traps along the way. And when you get to the scene where you come upon the two spirit person that is straight out of, I won't say straight out, so because that sounds like plagiarism, but it definitely reminded me of the whole One Eye Willie scene. For the people who've seen the Goonies, big One Eye Willie energy, big Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade energy, where they have to solve a puzzle to not die. And that's what happened in this episode. But it was really, really great to see an action adventure, which could have been a whole movie. Let's be real. An action adventure episode of television that centers three Black people, three very different Black people, having this adventure that, you know, is straight out of the books that Tick reads. And he always, you know, in that first scene, or first episode rather, he talked about a Black man being able to go on these types of adventures. That's why he reads books, even though the books are racist. That's why he reads these Lovecraftian type books, even though they were racist, because he appreciated the adventure element. And now in the show, Misha is once again reclaiming this adventure story for Black people, and I loved every second of it.
Right. Definitely shout out to Misha Green. She's the showrunner and creator of this show, who adapted the show from the book by Matt Ruff. Has made significant improvements, in my opinion, to the book. One of which is that Diana, the daughter of Hippolyta and George, she was a boy in the book. His name was Horace, and they had a whole other storyline for him. So to be able to reimagine this story and include a little Black girl who loves STEM and she loves astronomy, and she's sitting there in awe of her mother who named this constellation, and having Hippolyta be able to share this story of naming this constellation, but also being a victim of white supremacy once again, where even as a child, and she's this brilliant child who has won this competition, but she's not able to be the face of the competition because of white supremacy. And they choose a little white girl from Sweden to be the face of the competition instead of her. So we have this really touching, beautiful scene in the museum of Diana and Hippolyta reclaiming Hippolyta's legacy in front of all the white people who are there. And I definitely feel like that's what Misha Green has set out to do with Lovecraft Country, and that's what she's accomplishing. There is a flag in the ground in every single genre. We've seen now that Lovecraft Country is becoming an anthology series, which we may not have thought that was what the situation was when we first watched the first episode, but we've seen them jump into different tones. We've seen them jump into different genres. You know, the first and second episodes were kind of sci-fi with the monsters and the aliens. The third episode, we've had a haunted house and ghosts. It's, you know, very, very in the horror genre with the jump scares and all of that. And now we have this action adventure episode, Indiana Jones, Goonies episode, and that little boy, Tick, who loved to read these kinds of stories, but wasn't allowed to go on these adventures as a little Black boy from the South Side of Chicago. Misha is essentially saying, you don't actually have to engage in all this racist stuff, and you don't have to ignore it. You can actually have these adventures and be the center of these stories and not be removed or erased from your own stories or caricatured in these stories, because I'm creating something that's especially for you. And that is really exciting and inspiring. So shout out to Misha for that. And also shout out to Victoria Mahoney, who brought this episode to life and has had some very similar experiences herself as a trailblazer in telling Black stories, and is about to continue to do that as well with her next project. So let's bring on our special guest, the first woman to ever direct a Star Wars film in its 40-year history, and the director of Lovecraft Country episode number 4, A History of Violence. It's Victoria Mahoney. Welcome to Black Girl Watching.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Brooke and Britni.
We're so excited to have you.
First, I want to just say that that I'm going to just take 5 seconds to fangirl and tell you, too, that I'm really grateful that you are out in the world and doing what you're doing, and your instincts and intuition and insight is just mind-blowing whenever you talk about shows, and especially what you've been doing with this one, and your care and regard is, I wish I had a version of you two when I was a kid bopping around trying to make sense of things. And so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. One of the things that really struck me about this episode is that when I was watching, kind of like the 80s/90s kid in me jumped out because it was giving me big, like, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade energy, is giving me big Goonies injury with the, like, you know, when they get to that scene with the man-woman spirit together, I was like, oh, this is One Eye Willie vibes, right? So how do you ensure... Right? Isn't it? Like, it feels very One Eye Willie. Like, shout out to One Eye Willie. How do you ensure that, like, when you're coming in, it's not like this is a film and you're directing the whole film. You came in for this episode and you're directing this very adventure and action heavy episode. So how do you kind of balance all of those elements? You know, telling the cohesive story and kind of following the roadmap of the series in the first 2 episodes or first 3 episodes, while also, you know, being creative and putting your own stamp on this particular episode, which was just fun, right?
Yes, and it is interesting because I'm so curious what people will glean, because it's to a degree departure, and it's, you know, they might be trained by, you know, this past Sunday's episode, that, oh, they're on this tonal ride, and then, you know, we're going to ride on episode 4 and realize, oh, that's not the tonal ride, we're on another tonal ride, and that'll keep going, but through the series, which is wonderful and exciting. So there are a couple of answers in there. One is, you know, a big part of why I ended up doing this was Journey Smollett and Nina Shaw. But you know, Journey Smollett called me on a Saturday morning at the crack of dawn while I was hemming and hawing and trying to figure out my schedule, and completely bananas, and had wonderful luxury problem of too many scripts to read. And she called me on a Saturday morning to make sure I put this script at the top. And she said one sentence to me. And essentially, because I was, you know, like, oh, I'm gonna, you know, she could sense that I hadn't read it yet. First, it came in the Friday night prior, but there was a push on it, and they needed an answer from me to get on a plane within, I think, like 8 business days. So, she said this one sentence, which will harken back to what you just said. Is she said, "Vic, this is Indiana Jones and the Goonies with black folks." And I said,
yes.
What are you talking about? And why didn't anybody say that in the first place? Why'd they bury the goddamn lead? And I can book my ticket tomorrow. And I swear to you, I sent a note over to Bad Robot to Katie McGrath, funny enough, and said, oh, put me on a plane. I'm in. Then at that point, I did not read it. It was that one sentence. And it was like, I waited my whole life to hear any kind of version of that. Like, I'll be on the outside standing at the PA by the red door saying the lights on, just as happy as if I was directing it, because I just would want that episode to be in the world so badly. And so the idea that I lived a bulk of my life waiting, wanting, aching, longing, needing, hoping, dreaming for some version of that ride, sick and tired of imposing myself on other characters and protagonists who look and think and feel nothing like me, but I'm always having to impose myself on them because they get to be the center of the journey. And I'm like, shit. So I wanted in the world some version of Indiana Jones and the Goonies with people who look like me and my family members. And so I was like, that was it. I didn't even give a shit what went down. Then when I read the script, it was so taut. It was just taut and mean. It was so tight. You know, and I thought Nisha was doing, and everything that you see is scripted. So I just want you to understand, as far as music cues and tonal shifts, it's like, you know, she worked this out. It was a clear vision for her. And so it was exciting for me to have to go to work with someone, service someone's dream, where I wasn't trying to figure out the backstory, the front story, or the middle story. She had such detailed clarity from episode 1 to episode 10 that I never entered a murky ground. I was never lost. So I'm telling you, and this is important to know, that I had that shit blocked front to back before I stepped foot in Atlanta. The entire shit. So much so that when Rob McLaughlin, who is such an incredible person and a wonderful ally and DP, when we were doing our when we did our shot lists and overheads, I do overhead drawings, you know, when we were sitting and mapping it out, we were done so early. I had everything. I drew out the overheads and I sent them in to the line producers and on our tech scout, the whole crew. Boom. We sent the whole key crew. And the line producer looked back at me and said, and I said, now you're just showing off. And I looked at him and smiled and said, the love of the game. And I share that with you so that it's important for me to communicate with people who love this genre or big swings to know that one, people, the industry doesn't consider us as the first phone call on this. So that's why it was a big deal for me that Misha created it and this was the phone call, and that, Journey and Michael and Jonathan were the leads in my particular episode, right? And with me, of course. And so what was interesting to me was that I came in and it was very natural, and I didn't have some of the conflict that maybe some of the other directors might have had, because it was like, wait, this is humorous and there's a bit of levity over here, and then it gets dark and deep, and then there's a creature that fucking pops up, and then the father and son have this moment, and what's going on? Like, all of it was just wonderful, and the amount of blocking that was required to get those shots, which you could see, and the amount of time that we had for this episode, which is reduced from the pilot. You don't always get the same amount of time, of course. Totally cool, and you don't always get the same budget. Totally cool, but that means you have to swing hard and mean, and you cannot leave one stone unturned as far as investigation into character and where the camera's going to go, why it's going to go, and when it's going to move, and why it's going to move. So there was another question you asked me, and I don't think I answered it, but I did answer a whole bunch of other stuff.
Yeah, it was just about how do you put your individual stamp on this story, but I think you actually answered it. Shout out to Misha for being so thorough in writing this. But I don't want to take up all of our time fangirling about 80s action adventure movies, but yes, absolutely, we need more of those with Black folks.
I want to talk about some of the technical things about the things that you accomplished in this episode too. It was just there. So there's three scenes that really, really stick out to me. So it's the underwater scenes, which have to be incredibly difficult to do, but it was so beautifully shot. And then there's that steamy, the smaller one is like when they're in the library and you're looking through the books and you see Tick and Letty as they're arguing. I just love that. It's just really, really beautiful and kind of subtle in what you're doing there. But also that steamy but creepy love scene. I mean, I just, how did you approach a scene because like she's literally sleeping with the devil. We all know, but at the same time, it's kind of hot, but you also feel really disgusted by it because Ruby is in trouble and she is like drunk and she is not making good choices. So how did you approach that?
Oh, those were all so fun, and I can't even. I really just dig how much you care. You two. Just like it's really great to talk with you. The underwater scenes were really mapped out from every inch and second, for real, like how much water would be at one point, one of the caves that were built, and how we colorized them so that there was a blue, a yellow, a green. You know what I mean? Like this is, it was so exciting and mathematical in the approach to how we captured it on film. And I don't mean the emotions. I mean how we moved through which tunnel on which day, where the water rises and where it's, lower, and the elevator, and the things you should know is like the team built that elevator, that functional elevator. It goes up and down in water. I mean, I'd never seen anything like it. Me with my own eyes standing on a set, not something I saw. But to get a functional elevator that was safe and no one got injured, and all the care that went into this is it's really something. And Greg, our AD, was just, his ability to just move and understand the mechanics of how we could do this reasonably in scheduling. Was really, everyone did their job. Everyone came hard and everyone was excited. So, we shot, I think 8 days in water, I want to say total, like in water proper. But, it was really exciting. And I do want to say first that when there was a point we were all in the water and I looked around, and I'm telling you, it just like blows my mind. I looked around, and all the cast and the crew that were in, only, the required people went into the water for a number of reasons, and functionality and safety. But I looked out and everyone had a smile on their face. Everyone was just, but we're all separate. Like we're only, we have areas where we're on. I just noticed every single person, and I looked out, and I smiled at the actors, and each person I would say something to, how you doing or whatever the word was. The sentence that came back was either this direct sentence or a version of it, and it was, "I'm having the time of my life." That is worth a lot of what you end up seeing on screen, was that you can feel that we were not there annoyed by the challenges. We were excited. And again, this was a first for so many of us to be able to play at this skill set as far as, just how do you light skin tones, our skin tones in the water, in a cave. You know what I mean? Where's the light source? And all the things that had to happen for those scenes to be able to just, the actors could just communicate and have emotion. So that,
Right.
and we took a lot of care and detail, and I loved all that shit. Like that's my favorite shit. So and so was Rob's the DP, and so was Misha, and so we all, and I will tell you, like you can, I don't know if you're going to talk to them, but when you talk to Journey and Michael and Jonathan, they will talk about this episode honestly with you in a way that you'll be shocked that none of them were bothered, and they were all excited for the ride. So that's a big part of it. So no one was reluctant or complaining, and I think that affects the shots that come out. You can, Then the library scene, I think the library scene is it was special, and I love what you noted, because for me, that was a bit of a love letter, is that I spent so much of my childhood in the library hiding from different aspects of the violence around, where I grew up in New York in the 80s, but the library and the movie theater were that's where I had safe harbor. And so, I'll, to the day I die, if right now, if somebody rolled a cart past my house with a Dewey Decimal System, I'd hang up this phone and run outside and chase them just to play with them.
Oh my God. The kids have no idea. So I have a 14-year-old. He has zero clue what that is. Like going to look at a card catalog. Like what?
No, you had to earn your keep. You could not just go Google some shit off of you had to walk in, you had to and the numbers and the letters and the alphabet and the third alphabet and the third letter, then and you had to find the aisle, and you had to work for that book that you wanted. But what was great too is you would find these other things along the way, which is what I miss about them. But that, so those shots, and when I talk with Rob about that and why, and that there was a very deliberate inclusion of the books and the depth, and so why we kept the depth, the shots from one side and mapping it out and bringing them over to another side and peering through, and the vibe that someone might be watching, and the quietness of the library, it was all really fun. And again, like something that people may not consider is there are people, some sadly, who have very, very specific ideas about education and aptitude with Black folks, surrounding Black folks. So that, capturing that scene and that set in that way was pointed and purposeful as everything else, And then the love scene, which was fun, was really crazy. And I played a song, and it was really respectful. We had a safety person there, an intimacy coordinator, and everything. But these two, we talked it through, and as you do, everything else you need to talk through in order to find out where people are safe. And I'm not interested in violating and pushing past anybody's comfort zone, and I'm not interested in betraying someone or doing something I said we weren't going to do. So, there's just a task of finding out what someone's comfortable with, and again, always making them safe, so that whatever part of them, a lot of times, if a writer, a director, producer, actor says no, something is occurring that they don't feel safe, that when this goes out of my hands, what will happen with it later. So a lot of my job as a director, whether it's an emotional beat at a funeral scene, whether it's some scene where they're ripping a house apart, or whether it's a scene where they're kissing for the first time, softness and love, doesn't matter. Whatever it is, jumping out of a building, jumping, flying wires up in the sky, whatever it is there's something about the way I regard them. My job, a director, is to regard them in a way that they are safe to give whatever it is that they wish to tap into within their being. And so love scenes are the same, and you just have to, and then, I'm off camera at one point, saying certain words that are like, so that she's realigning to what's occurring in The Conjuring, and you know what I mean? It's like, oh, and you can feel it. It's fun. And, trust. It's all a dance of trust, every inch of it.
When I say I had so much fun watching this episode, I think so far of the 4 episodes, it's the funniest episode. You have the kid in the library who is constantly telling Tick, like, shut up, you're too loud and I'm trying to read my book. And it's just like Montrose, Michael K. Williams is...
Him when he walks, and him on the trail, and him on the beam, and his face. Like, there were moments where I couldn't hold myself. Like, I called cut and burst out because he was living. Like, he embodied that ladder. Sometimes we were, 30 feet up sometimes we're 8 feet up, but you felt like he was hundreds of feet up, and that there was no ground. I mean, he was this weirdly comic relief on top of then this painful, brutal opening sequence and the end sequence. But in the middle, and it was great because Jonathan, I called him, I thought it was confusing, but, Atticus's mission and Letty's mission, they both had different things that they were needing and proving and wanting. And I love that triumvirate of energy that counterbalanced each other instead of, they each were on the same fear level or the same curiosity, the same comfort level. I love that they were all at different places on the rickety scale.
And it's just kind of like, when he's like, you better not drop me, boy, after he throws the bag to Atticus, and Atticus just literally fumbles the bag, which is, he's like, okay, you fumbled this bag, you better not fumble me.
That entire beam, from the moment they exit the cave and they're on that ledge and they walk to the other side, that sequence had to happen in one day, and that's all we got. And if we didn't get it on that day, it would have been removed. And this is just a part of storytelling. We all go through it. It's not, it's just the day you pick what cost and how you weigh it out, and not just in all series, it's not just the dollar to your episode and your budget. It's the overall, and making sure that the vision of the show the person who created it, that their needs are met all the way across, not just in your one episode. So fast forward to that particular day, that there were aspects of it that were tricky, and it did not look on paper like we could shoot this in one day. And it wasn't a factor of doubt. It was just, this is insanely, wildly, beautifully ambitious, and do we really realistically have the time? And I had mapped that out in such a way that, and I'm telling you, like bananas, so that each shot and each camera carried us into the next shot. So we were picking up the first thing and then the last thing. So each character, I'm shooting a 3-shot, the single rides, and that part dies down, but then the next part, and I just wrote this whole thing out of exactly how it would go, and talked to Michael and Journey and Jonathan about it. It will tell you, like, it was probably one of the craziest days in their career, because it was like, this sounds very odd to say, but it was as if someone was directing on crystal meth, because it was like, it was so bananas, but we had to make the day, and we did. And every shot, every beat that Nisha wrote in the script was in the bin. And it was, when I drove home that day from work, my face hurt from smiling, because it was this thing that we all came together and we got what was on the page in an abnormal amount of time, and everything was against us. It just didn't make any sense. I'm telling you, and it's so hard to quantify, but it's one of those moments that happens on a job where it does not look like it will happen, and when it comes together, and it came together fun, it means the world to me. And that's a marker, a personal marker.
Well, that sounds like the advice that you got from David Fincher, like the train must leave the station.
Yeah. Oh my God, I love your research. That's exactly right. is that is my training and that's and in the beats before that it had to have the emotional beat before, because that's why we're there, with this connection between this father son and this young woman who's they're all trying to find their ways, and it couldn't just be the cool action, but the human and the parts of them being human and trusting each other and all the shit that goes in it. So I love that I love the whole show, but I love the sequence, and I love the backbeat when Montrose and Atticus are in the hallway right before they go into the room, and Montrose does the thing. That quiet beat is something special, and it was real, and we captured it on camera, and we earned it by that episode. You see the conflict of the father son, and so by that point you're like, whoa, and something that young people want from primary caregiver their entire life.
To what you were saying in terms of how do we show up in this world and how do we represent in this world, like our world 2020 feels increasingly like some kind of dystopian nightmare. Let's be real. We have coronavirus, we have Trump running amok, right? And you and Ava DuVernay, you guys are adapting Octavia Butler, and she's one of the people that, especially this year, people have returned to, like, yo, y'all should be reading this because she already told us what's going on or what's going to happen. How does working on sci-fi projects like Lovecraft and like Star Wars prepare you to tackle Dawn, Octavia Butler's novel?
That's great because, well, first, I don't know if you saw last night, Parable of the Sower is on the New York Times bestseller list. It jumped, which is so cool, and that just tells you, the hunger and curiosity and where that there's a shape shift and who readers, audiences are interested in, and so what's fascinating about all of this is, so, I pitched Dawn years ago. I wrote the script, the pilot, and I had very clear ideas, and just came to me. And that's because the Dawn means a great deal to me, and it meant a great deal to me when I first read it when I was young, and I had resonated in a way that it just spoke to and for things that I live and am curious about. And so I had, to a degree, a visual scope on what I would do, because that's part of always like, what would I do if I did that? What would I do if that was a movie? What would I do if that was So some of that had already been playing for me. When I came through and made my lookbook, the first lookbook that I did, Ava and I met in a restaurant that we eat at 1 o'clock in the morning, I think, on a Friday night, because she was editing and I was filming something, and we met, and I showed her, like, this is what I got, and she was like, oh shit, and it was fun, it was beautiful. And then I subsequently made other lookbooks that were, more polished for the producers, and pitched and all that stuff. What's interesting is there were a few things inside the story that at the time might have made some of the people on the job with us, it was a little bit maybe either too much, or anyone could have said, ooh, that's a lot. As I had masks, little kids wearing masks, people wearing masks. I had these black ops shit coming through. I had these circumstances that we are now living. I could keep going, but I can't give obviously too much of a story. But I had events that where we're at now. So what's fascinating about that is, one, we're up, and it was way sooner than I thought. We got here way sooner than I thought. And the other thing is, okay, so now what do we do? Because we're living this moment, this dystopian nightmare, which I happen to believe, I'm sure you two have your own version of, but I had a moment through all of this where I felt an odd sense of relief in that now other people that have been sleepwalking can carry this, and we don't have to, we can just breathe and grieve if that's what's required on a given day in a given moment, but that we can try to heal or try to repair our community and all the other work that we have to do that we've not been able to do because we've been out trying to just survive and awaken people and all the other shit that we're trying to do everywhere we ever go. And so I feel like, oh great, now some other people can do the work. That not thing that and when you talk about this show, like, how many people Google Sundown Town after Lovecraft? Had no idea, never taught at school, never learned it, and all the stuff that's occurring. So what's fascinating is I had to go back, interesting and brutal. I had to go back in a post-Black Lives Matter world, in a post-coronavirus world, in a post-ding-dong in the administration world, in the post Watchmen world and a post Lovecraft world, I have to go back to the drawing board and sit in my office and revisit, and call upon the ancestors and beg for some new ideas because all my shit it's got, some people beat me to the punchline, and so I had to go sort of, and it was really beautiful and painful. Of um, now, what do we do with this particular story if some of the things that were exciting and fresh to some degree original aren't now? We've already we pushed past certain discussions, which is beautiful because now they did work for us that ours can arrive at a later point without having to anoint or educate up front. So that work has been done for us to some degree by our sisters. And so what's fascinating is that I now have, I'm at a place where I got to go back to the beginning and what the thing was with Dawn for me, very, very, very like at the original moment. I was a teenager reading it, and I am so grateful that I was able to remove my ego and I could accept this invitation to dig deeper and to swing wider. Um, so it's we all can wonderfully inform and propel each other, and that is what I'm most grateful for. And I do believe that we all ache that Miss Octavia Butler didn't have her day back in the moment that her books dropped down. And like, should we even talk about that? Still, there are books out with white women on the cover. Should we even people don't even know that one of my big missions is to get the book, the audio book is not a sister. So that's my next move is to get whoever we cast to do the book reading because that is brutal when you think of the voice. Like there's new, there's like, this shit, stuff in the voice. You're like, oh, the intonation's off, whatever. But I can't even listen, but the book itself, all of our books, we know should have been made in the moment, like minutes after they should have been bought in the galley copy.
Right. And so, it was only in 2015 that H.P. Lovecraft was replaced as the image from the World Fantasy Awards with Octavia Butler's image. So definitely, shout out to DJ Older for getting that done. But for you as well, like to bring the story of Dawn to life. And also even with Lovecraft Country, that was a book that was written by a white man. And so it's just so many Black women, like we're just reclaiming that space. And it's a really, really exciting time. I appreciate you so much for the work that you're doing.
What else are you working on?
I can tell you that Dawn is at the top of my heart and it means the world to me. And, I fought for that job and I ached for that job and I've carried it, in my heart. And I water that plant, every second. And I've been up till 7 a.m., for a good stretch of the past, 6 weeks, trying to get that thing back to, trying to reshape it into the, form for readiness. So, I don't have an answer now, but I will definitely key you up when I get something concrete. Kill Them All is a film that I'm doing that's really exciting. And that's at Paramount, and that is really fun. And I don't know if either of you know, came from a graphic novel, and it's again a version of what we talked about earlier, that people might be like, yeah, we know this story. It was called Die Hard. And it was like, and then, or they're like The Raid or whatever. It's a nod to the 90s. It's specifically, that it's not a secret. That's what it's a nod to. But what I feel like that's fun and exciting is that, you have never seen it. You haven't seen it through these eyes. I can't say more than past that. Kyle Starks wrote the graphic novel, and it's just bananas. I mean, it's bananas. The action starts, I think, at the third minute, third page, and it never lets up to the end of the film. Never, ever, ever lets up. Never. It's so crazy. It's so much fun. Yeah. And I can tell you sadly that when I was, I've been trying to, line something like that up, and there were people who just were like, she doesn't have the experience. She doesn't have the experience. And it's a personal win in a way that it ends up connecting back to what we talked about earlier, that every time I go through the door, there's a chance that a bunch of other people can like me, like us. can get that phone call. When you talk about the markers in my career, I'm aware that when I do something, I'm often the first person to pass through that portal. So they all mean something because even the smallest thing is massive for people like us. I know that when I go to work, if I hit a home run, whatever that means, if I don't screw the pooch, I know that they'll be like, oh yeah, let's go get someone else's car. Let's go get another one. And if I screw it up, they'll be like, we tried it once, didn't work out.
We appreciate you. We appreciate you so much and the doors that you are opening because that is real. I don't want to downplay that. That is real. They will shut the doors, but we are building our own. We're going to lift you up. We're going to watch all your stuff. We're going to tell everybody watch all your stuff.
Yes. We really, really appreciate having you here, and we can't wait to have you back. When Dawn is like a real thing on our screens, and we can kind of deep dive into that as well.
I just will look forward to that. And I thank you for the time and care you're putting into reflecting our people. Thank you. Be well.
Big thank you to Victoria Mahoney for joining us for this episode and giving us more insights, particularly around how she shot the action scenes. It's amazing that one of the best scenes is one of the scenes that almost didn't make it. So it's amazing that she was able to pull off such an amazing episode that gave me and my little 80s and 90s kid action heart a lot of life. But before we kind of get to the next questions, I know we left off a little bit of piece of that adventure. So after they get through the booby trap, they get into this other chamber. It starts to fill up with water. The stakes are increasingly raised. We don't know if anybody's going to drown. And Tick does that thing again that you hate and that Letty calls out, like trying to just be the hero. And he's so oblivious to the fact that all three of them are just as deep into it. And he keeps trying to when they come upon the elevator that leads to Letty's house, which was weird. If you're in Boston under a museum, elevator to your house in Chicago. Weird and creepy. But when they see the elevator, he tries to get them to get on it. Like, it's too dangerous. It's getting too dangerous all of a sudden. You guys get on the elevator. And Letty was like, it's just now getting too dangerous. It's been dangerous. Montrose was kidnapped. I was killed. And now I'm back to life. So stop your bullshitting, basically. And let's finish this out. So they finally end up into this room after he has to insert his arm, and it pulls some of his blood, which again, here we go with the blood. And the blood is what unlocks this chamber, this next room for them to go into. And in that room, they meet this two-spirit person who embodies both feminine and masculine energy and bodies all in one.
Right. And so this is kind of where it gets problematic, I think, because you have Yahima, who is our only two-spirit character, and we're using the pronouns she and her because that's what's used in the show. So hopefully that is correct. We're starting to see some of the pieces come together, like, okay, maybe this two-spirit person, Yahima, is able to decipher the code of the language of Adam and help Tick cast spells. But what she ends up telling him is that, no, I'm not going to do that. I've seen what Titus Braithwaite has done with his power, and I'm not going to help you. But when Montrose goes to take the missing pages of Titus from Yahima, then a spell, I guess, is broken and the water starts to break through and they're all being threatened with drowning. So they escape, all of them, and Tick grabs Yahima and takes them out to safety into the elevator. Does Montrose, somebody drops the pages. Because of what we've seen at the end of this episode, I think that Montrose let those pages slip on out that elevator on purpose because he's the one that took the pages. So I don't know if he had the pages the whole time with him in that elevator. It's really hard to see, but we just see the papers slipping on out. But Letty is slick to the bullshit. I mean, I don't think that she saw him do it or thinks that he did it on purpose, but she sees it sliding away. So she swims out after it. She grabs it. They all get to safety in time. They're all happy. And then Tick, with his annoying ass, just grabs Letty and kisses her after he's been so mean to her in this episode. And Montrose even told him earlier in the episode, you need to apologize to your girl. Use your words. Don't use your mouth for shutting Letty up or with a kiss. You know, you need to actually acknowledge the stuff that you've done, Tick, all this episode, and how you've been rude. But anyway, they all kiss and they're all happy and excited. But then we see that Yahima has been turned into a siren. So she yells every time she opens her mouth because Titus has spelled it so that if she escapes from his vault, she will never be able to speak. And she doesn't think that she'll be able to remove the spell so that she'll be able to speak and communicate with Tick like she was communicating with him inside of the vault. And Tick thinks he'll try to teach her English and they'll try to figure out how to cast all kinds of spells, including how to break the spell of her being a siren. But Montrose has other plans.
Does he ever?
And Montrose goes in and apologizes, like that makes a difference, and then slits Yahima's throat. It's very graphic, and that is how the episode ends. And it's very upsetting. It's very possibly triggering and potentially traumatic, I think, for people who are trans, who are also dealing with this kind of graphic violence on a day-to-day basis in real life, and have been all year in the middle of the pandemic as well. So I don't know, for Yahima to be the only intersex person on the show, and then to have no voice, have no agency, and then to be brutally murdered, all within 5 minutes of Yahima being on screen.
It's a lot. And it's yet another reason why, I was upset with Montrose. I remember being like, oh, hell no. Oh, hell no. Like, really, Montrose?
Right.
The fact that Yahima had already been, brutalized, had already seen Titus Braithwaite wipe out their people, it just seems doubly harmful and hurtful to see Yahima's character go out like this.
Right. So hopefully this is something that will be, addressed or rectified in future episodes. I do know that there are more queer characters that we're going to see in next week's episode, but I don't know what the future holds for Yahima's character specifically, or for intersex characters. So we'll just have to wait and see. We have more questions about what that is going to mean for all of them, what the consequences of Montrose's behavior is. But I also think we've missed a huge part of this episode we have yet to discuss, which is Ruby and William.
Ruby. Oh my God. Oh my God. As soon as he was in the bar, I was just like, no, Ruby. No, Ruby. No, Ruby. This is where Christina's devilment, I don't know what the right word, connivingness, schemingness comes in, because William already knows that Letty is Ruby's sister. There's no reason for him to be there trying to holler at Ruby other than to try to use Ruby against Letty in some kind of way. Ruby can't possibly know any of these things because nobody has told her about, what they experience in Artem. So she doesn't have the information to be on guard against random white men popping up and talking to her about whatever. But she's also feeling slighted because she finally, she's looking like new money. Her dress is popping, her blouse is popping, her hat is just perfectly tilted, her hair is popping. She has a resume in hand and she's going to Marshall Fields to apply for this job. And she sees that they have a black sales clerk already. And that just devastates her because she's hip to the game. She knows that they're not going to hire two black women to work in this department store, and somebody beat her to the punch. So she's feeling real low. She got a fancy dress on, but she's not even singing right. She don't get no claps. And yeah, that just leaves her exposed to this man's attention. She, she probably thinks it's gonna be like a one-time thing, and I mean, like, who knows with these people,
right? And it's really, really creepy too. We have the Marilyn Manson music that's playing as their love scene is happening. I Put a Spell on You, because again, he is the white devil. He has branding on his chest that's like horns of some kind, and she doesn't run away immediately. Like, all of your black girl senses should be kicking in at this point, ma'am. But for some reason, she is just all into this. I know she's also intoxicated. There's just a lot happening in that scene. But I think it goes back to the central principles that we were talking about in episode 3. This is what happens when you are divided from community. In community, you can trust everybody, you can talk to everybody, and there are no secrets. And together with all of your applied knowledge, you can defeat white supremacy. Ruby is completely isolated. You know, she is not speaking to her sister, and her sister is trying to protect Ruby by not sharing all the information that happened. Like, they've all agreed to keep this thing a secret for the protection of other people. But what happens when you have secrets? Things start to break down. So you have Montrose committing this heinous act. You have Ruby, who is subject to victimization by William and also by Christina, you can imagine, because William is her henchman. And so outside of that knowledge, Ruby can't make good decisions for herself or anybody else, because this is definitely going to have some consequences for Letty and for Atticus, one can imagine. Some other things that we learned is that Christina believes that Hiram's orrery leads to a time travel machine. And we also know that there's a necromancer in Lovecraft Country, which is where Hippolyta and Diana, I believe, are headed next. When she turns that car around. And so maybe we will see George again, as Courtney B. Vance alluded in our interview with him after episode 2. So that is where we left off with episode 4, A History of Violence.
And before we get out of here, we just want to thank those people who have been listening to our podcast and rocking with us and giving us awesome feedback on Twitter. Shout out to Neil Carter. Shout out to Vanessa Williams.
Yes, the Vanessa Williams.
Yes, the Vanessa Williams. And shout out to at Choosing High. She also said, I would like to see Uncle George back sooner rather than later. So we're not the only ones who think George is coming back. And, you know, if Hippolyta is able to unlock this time machine, maybe she can bring her husband back. I'm excited and also dismayed at what the rest of this season will hold. So I guess we will just have to stay tuned. But we'll definitely be here talking about all of it. So hit us up. Black Girl Watching on Twitter, blackgirlwatching.com. We want your thoughts.
Hashtag Black Girl Watching. You can hit us up on Instagram as well. We're also at Black Girl Watching on Instagram. Thank you so much again, Victoria Mahoney, for that awesome interview. And we'll see you back here same time next Monday for more Lovecraft Country.
Indeed. Black Girl out.